In his pursuit of wisdom, Pythagoras traveled broadly, searching for lost occult knowledge. He found it in the mystery schools scattered throughout many different cultures. Pythagoras synthesized the elements of these teachings into a new discipline, philosophy. Its foundation, numbers.
He believed that mathematics and philosophy and an understanding of the divine all went together.
We can't say he originated anything, but he condensed and boiled down the knowledge of the world and then brought it to a practical application.
Pythagoras identified numbers as the most fundamental elements of creation.
As we look at science in this day and age, we're finding that the whole world is filled with these mathematical constants. You've got pi, you've got the speed of light, you've got the force of gravitation.
In 518 BC, Pythagoras opened a school in the Croton region of southern Italy. His carefully selected disciples were called mathematicoi. Their initiation was rigorous. 3 introductory years, followed by 5 years of absolute silence, then 5 more of training. Only then were students ready to learn the most sacred mysteries of numbers.
He wanted to produce philosophers like himself, so you had to be very circumspect, you had to be very self-controlled to be able to even be in his school.
Pythagoras turned the numbering system of the Babylonians into a sacred science.
They believed that number was like God, and to connect with this was to be talking to God. And so from that arises a whole lot of symbolism that later becomes numerology, Kabbalah, things like that.
Pythagoras discovered that the mystery schools shared the belief that all of creation was at one with God.
He did a huge amount of explaining sacred mathematics by showing how the 1 splits and becomes 2, the 2 finds a synthesis and becomes 3, the 3 breaks open and becomes the 10,000 things.
Pythagoras also applied numbers to decode music, which Greeks regarded as the language of the gods. He invented the monochord, which defined the numerical ratios of the musical scale. Pythagoras believed he had solved the mysteries of the universe.
But there was also this idea that there was a music of the spheres, that the heavens itself was playing a sort of orchestral piece.
The planets themselves stack up around the sun at harmonic intervals.
Ultimately, the exclusivity of Pythagoras' school caused its downfall. In 508 BC, the school was burned to the ground.
Pythagoras himself left and went off into the countryside and died, and no one really knows what happened. Some people think that he committed suicide, but it's a mystery. No one's really sure.
The society was hounded into extinction. Generations of later Greeks built upon Pythagoras' philosophy, and Aristotle turned it into science.
His father was Mnesarchus, an international merchant from Samos, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea, and his mother was Parthenis, a Greek Apollonian. While traveling abroad near Delphi in Greece, Parthenis requested Mnesarchus visit the oracle to Apollo. The oracle informed the couple Parthenis was pregnant with a male child. Parthenis changed her name to Pythagoras, but no record exists of her surviving the birth of her son, Pythagoras. Pythagoras traveled extensively with his father Mnesarchus during his formative years, and Mnesarchus raised Pythagoras into the Median Persian cult of Zoroaster, the prophet of Ahura Mazda, the god of light.
Pythagoras believed that knowledge should be kept from the vulgar masses and restricted to a learned elite introduced into his secret society. Yes, Pythagoras was also the pseudo-messianic figure of ancient Greece, who developed a literal cult following under the secret society he established, which combined mathematics and philosophy. He led this order of the Pythagoreans despite the fact that it became a capital offense to follow his teachings, until the school building itself was burned and he was either exiled or assassinated by rivals. Alive from approximately 570 BC to 495 BC, though some say he lived to age 100, he was well educated and born to a wealthy family from the wealthiest of Greek islands, Samos, the one nearest to Turkey's shore. According to the account, while his mother was pregnant, an oracle predicted that her unborn son would surpass in beauty and wisdom all who ever lived and would be of the greatest advantage to the human race in everything pertaining to the life of man. Hence, Pythagoras was believed to be a divine descendant of the god Apollo, sent to redeem the human race. His teachings were patently secret and never allowed to be written down. Furthermore, Pythagoras addressed neophyte initiates of his secret order only from behind the curtain, very Wizard of Oz, and even the true meaning of Pythagoras' geometrical formulas remained a well-kept secret, which his students could learn only after taking a 5-year vow of silence. So chances are there's a deeper and more important meaning behind even the universally taught a squared plus b squared equals c squared formula. A progressive series of initiations was required to advance into his inner ring of disciples, who were said to be constantly contemplating the transmigration of the soul after death, as well as the nature and identity of the quote, perfect number. The Pythagorean scholars also happen to be among the most important members of society, both in ancient Greece and abroad, and were taught certain signs and words by which they might know each other. Within a few years, some 300 initiates, all Pythagoreans, held the sovereignty of Croton, and soon dozens of other city-states diffused across ancient Greece. According to the National Gazette in the early 19th century, this sage of Samos had conceived the sublime idea of forming a school of enlightened statesmen who might govern the world, while they themselves were governed by wisdom and virtue. It appears that Pythagoras had crafted the first workable conspiracy for global domination. Much of what is known about Pythagoras was passed down by Plato, his most famous student, who lived after Pythagoras had already died.
The first person to ever present the idea of a sun-centered universe was Pythagoras of Samos in around 500 BC. Pythagoras is also widely recognized by Masonic historians as being the very first Freemason. Master Mason Dr. James Anderson said in his defense of Masonry that, "I am fully convinced that Freemasonry is very nearly allied to the old Pythagorean discipline, from whence I am persuaded it may in some circumstances very justly claim a descent." Master Mason William Hutchinson wrote in his Spirit of Masonry that the ancient Masonic record brings us positive evidence of the Pythagorean doctrine as Basilidian principles making the foundation of our religious and moral duties. 33rd degree Freemasonic historian Albert Mackey, in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, wrote that on his return to Europe, Pythagoras established his celebrated school at Crotona, a Dorian colony in the south of Italy, much resembling that subsequently adopted by the Freemasons. His school soon acquired such a reputation that disciples flocked to him from all parts of Greece and Italy. Pythagoras taught as the principal dogma of his philosophy the system of metempsychosis, or the transmigration of souls. He taught the mystical power of numbers, and much of the symbolism on that subject which we now possess is derived from what has been left to us by his disciples. He was also a geometrician, and is regarded as having been the inventor of several problems. The schools established by Pythagoras at Crotona and other cities have been considered by many writers as the models after which Masonic lodges were subsequently constructed. The disciples of this school wore the simplest kind of clothing, and having on their entrance surrendered all their property to the common fund, they then submitted for 3 years to voluntary poverty, during which time they were also compelled to a rigorous silence. The doctrines of Pythagoras were always delivered as infallible propositions which admitted of no argument. Before admission to the privileges of this school, the previous life and character of the candidate were rigidly scrutinized, and in the preparatory initiation secrecy was enjoined by an oath, and he was made to submit to the severest trials of his fortitude and self-command. He who, after his admission, was alarmed at the obstacles he had to encounter, was permitted to return to the world, and the disciples, considering him as dead, performed his funeral obsequies, and erected a monument to his memory. The mode of living in the school of Crotona was like that of the modern communists. The brethren, about 600 in number, with their wives and children, resided in one large building. They arose before day to pay their devotions to the sun. The meals consisted principally of bread, honey, and water, for though the table was often covered with delicacies, no one was permitted to partake of them. It was in this secret school that Pythagoras gave his instructions on his interior doctrine and explained the hidden meaning of his symbols. There were 3 degrees. The first, or mathematic, being engaged in the study of the exact sciences, and the second, or theoretic, in the knowledge of God and the future state of man, but the third, or highest degree, was communicated only to a few whose intellects were capable of grasping the full fruition of the Pythagorean philosophy. In addition to these admissions by Masonic historians, the life and work of Pythagoras closely resembles many aspects of the craft, from his obsession with triangles and geometry to his school cult full of initiatory rites and brainwashing. Candidates were rigidly scrutinized, just like candidates for Masonry are given the 3rd degree, i.e. forced to answer many probing personal questions, and are then either given a white ball or black ball by Masons in the lodge, just one black ball resulting in being blackballed or kicked out. If initiated, just like in Masonry, Pythagorean initiates had to swear oaths of secrecy and loyalty, then submitted to various tests, trials, and rituals. The brethren lived like communists and worshipped the sun. Over time, they progressed through a series of 3 degrees in which only the privileged few in the highest degree learned the truth of the symbols and rituals. The many parallels of the Pythagorean school and modern Freemasonry are far too similar to ignore.